Hey guys, so today I just want to give you, by the way, here I am. I just want to give you a quick little screen printing tutorial for how I print my shirts at home. I am not the most professional person ever, but I'm still able to produce shirts that are worthy of wearing and keeping, so hopefully I have something to share with you today that is helpful. So the first thing is that everything that you need is set out on your table, kind of like a mise en place type situation where everything you need is there where you need it, so you can grab it and then you can print as smoothly as possible. You don't want to be scrambling all over the place and therefore increasing your chances of messing up, because with screen printing it's very, very easy to mess up. For the shirt, I have a piece of wood. Here is an example. As you can see, I've used it to print already. There are several different ways, obviously, to go about this, but this is how I do it. And then I just spray it with some spray glue. And when you're spraying with spray glue, you want to make sure that the nozzle isn't covered in dried up glue, because what can happen when you do that is that you'll have like blobs of glue, and then that can transfer onto your shirt, and then that is really, really hard to remove. So you want to make sure that you are creating a sticky surface, but that it's not drenched in glue basically. And like I said, there are a lot of things that can go wrong with screen printing. Throughout this video, I'm going to name a couple of them, that just things that you should watch out for, things that I have learned from making countless mistakes. But just keep in mind, if you're on your own screen printing journey, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes, and all those mistakes are gonna help you be better. So don't worry, I guess. After you put the glue on the board, you wanna put your shirt on top and then smooth it out and make sure that it's sticking to the board. And when you do this, you want to make sure that you're not stretching out the shirt too much, because what can happen if you do that is that the ink will penetrate into the parts where the shirt is stretched out, and then it will cause the design to wrinkle. And this also happens, by the way, when you have a design that has very thin lines and you print too much ink within those thin lines. Just make sure that your shirt is not too stretched out. And now, as you can see, I have this little contraption with hinge clamps where I normally can put my screens, and then it'll go up and down like this. So this helps me make sure the screen is in a very stable place so that I can use both my hands to print the design. And I'll get more into that in a moment. Just wanted to explain that normally I use these hinge clamps to help me print, but with this particular screen, it's a little bit too high up, so I can't get it to where the chest is. And if I turn it over, the shirt doesn't fit. So I actually have to do it either by just using one of these clamps to hold down the screen, or in this case, since the design is so small, I can actually just hold it with my hand. If you have a friend, then they can help you hold the screen for you. Just keep in mind that normally when it comes to printing a larger design, you really want some kind of aid to hold the screen for you, because otherwise the screen can slip and you can end up not printing the design very evenly. But in this case, we're good because the design is quite small. Okay, so let's get into placing the design and then printing. And like I said, this is just my way of doing it. There are many different types of screen printers, and they all have their different methods, and I'll link those all down below so you can kind of have a look yourself what kind of options are available to you. The more that I do this, the more I'm like, you know, there might be some better and some more efficient ways, but there isn't necessarily a correct way. Alright, so how to place a design on a shirt. You know, you could get like a ruler and put it under the screen and measure exactly where you want to put it, but I just feel that the more experienced I've become with this, the more I just have like a feeling for it. So for this design, it goes on from where I'm viewing it, the right chest. So I try to line it up with the hem here, and then I try to get it a little bit above the armpit, so like here. It's kind of hard to see a little bit because, first of all, this shirt is an XL size, so it's a little bit big, and then also my screen is really full of ink. Around here should be okay. So if it were possible, I would now clamp it down, but I can't. So I'm just gonna hold it with my hand. So applying the ink. You really don't want to put too much ink. You should do this with a palette knife because the ink gets, this is a paintbrush and the ink kind of gets stuck inside the bristles. Luckily this is a paintbrush I don't need, so it doesn't matter, but you should use a palette knife to apply the ink. And you don't want to put too much because otherwise they'll flood the design, and you don't want to put too little because then it gets harder to print. But I think this much should be okay. The more you do it, the more experience you get. Like I said earlier, ideally you want to do this with both hands so that you get like a even covering of ink, but I can't do that, so let's just do it this way. Without pressure, and holding the squeegee like this, upright, I just pull the ink over the design. And that way the ink is now evenly covering all parts of the design. And then for the next part, I angle the squeegee and then I apply pressure and then I press the ink through the design. And then I just do that one more time. So you want to ideally get like 2 passes. So again, just cover the design and then angle, apply pressure and pull. And that should be enough. I'll put the squeegee aside, take off your screen, and there you have it. Now I'm going to quickly wash the screens and then I'm gonna come back. And the reason that I do this so fast is because you don't want the ink to dry on your screen and ruin your screens basically. And again, once you're done with your inks, you want to make sure that you cover it, and let's go. Okay, so while the shirt is drying, it's not going to take that long because, like I said, the design is really small. And while I talk, I'm just going to cover my ink a little bit. So yeah, it's not going to take very long because the design is relatively small. What you could do is you could blow dry it to make it dry faster, which is, again, more useful if you're working with a larger design. Since I'm talking, I'm just gonna let it dry while I'm talking. Let's talk about my inks, my screens, and just a general helpful guideline for when you're screen printing. By the way, I'm also letting the small squeegee that I just used dry as well, because I found that if you use it while it's still wet and potentially still covered in like watery ink, when that drops onto the shirt, it will cause a stain that you can't remove, and that sucks. So there are just so many little precautions like this that you have to take when you're screen printing, but eventually you get used to them. So I get some questions sometimes about what kind of inks I use, and it's actually a mix of this medium, I forgot what it's called, but it's just like a gel basically, which is transparent, and you mix it with a pigment. So this would be the black pigment, for instance. So my ink is, I would say, like 60 to 70% this, but then because I found that this ink, the viscosity wasn't what I wanted, I started mixing Speedball ink into it because that was my way of making it a little bit more liquidy. With the Speedball ink, I find that the ink is not as opaque over time, but I like that it's more liquidy, so that's why I started mixing these 2 inks together. I don't know if screen printers actually do this. This is just something that I did and I found that it works. The only thing is that, and this took me a really long time to figure out, the Speedball ink has to be heat set. When I was printing with only the Speedball ink, I noticed that after the wash, the ink would wash out and ruin the shirt, and that was really frustrating for a while until I figured out, oh my god, it actually says that I need to heat set it, and it doesn't say how, but I found a tutorial for it on YouTube, and basically what it is just you put some baking sheet or parchment paper or whatever onto the design, and you iron it under like medium to high heat for about 3 to 5 minutes on each side. So you also have to flip it over and do it again. And I also like to put a little bit of parchment paper underneath the shirt, so in between where the shirt is touching the ironing board, because I found for some reason sometimes the ink likes to transfer over onto the material of the ironing board, and then that transfers over again to the shirt. Lots of these little precautions. As you can see, my fabulously taped screen. There are different designs burnt into it. This is created by using a more photographic method where, long story short, basically the design is burnt into the screen, which beforehand was treated with a kind of emulsion. I've never done this myself. I realized from the get-go, you know what, I don't have the tools and the know-how to do this, so I'm gonna just outsource the service and have someone make the screens for me. You could totally try and do it yourself. I'm gonna leave a wonderful tutorial down below by Eva Stalinski. She explains this really, really well. So yeah, you know, consider either outsourcing or doing it yourself. There are also other methods that you could get your design on the screen. For example, my internet pal Marena Skinner, she doesn't use a photographic method. I forgot what she does, but you could check out her Instagram profile if you want. Please don't DM her messages. I'm pretty sure that she gets too many already, but yeah, just to give you an example, there are different ways you can do it. Just Google it is what I'm gonna say. So I was just describing how I mixed my inks because I wanted to get like the right consistency, and I think a really good consistency to have for your ink is basically not too liquidy but not too gel-like. You want to be able to print your design as evenly as possible. If the ink is too thick, it's really, really hard to do that. The print just ends up looking badly if you're just like trying to print too hard because you're not able to get the really, really thick ink through. But if your ink is too liquidy, you risk kind of flooding the design because maybe you have too much ink. And also another thing that I found is if you aren't taping the edges of your, well, first of all, you should always tape the edges of your screens both inside and out, but I found that even with taped edges, if your ink is too liquidy, sometimes it can actually like leak through it and then ruin your shirt. So many obstacles. While I'm here, I should also mention that, as you can see, I have multiple designs burnt into one screen, and this is just to save on the amount of screens that you're buying. But for any part of the screen that you're not using, I used to use like newspaper to cover it up while I was printing one side, but I found that kind of would stop the flow of my printing, and that would translate over to the design and it wouldn't look good. What you can do instead is you could either cover it with like electrical tape or clear packaging tape, and that seems to work really well, and I would also do it on like both sides. Alright, so the final piece of advice that I want to give in this part of the video is something that I learned to do almost like on an obsessive level, is to keep checking my hands if there's any ink or if there's any dirt. Because if you have dirty hands and you touch your shirt during any point of the process, then you've ruined your shirt. It sucks so much. And yeah, just make sure that your workspace is clean, that your board is clean, that everything that could potentially come in contact with the shirt is clean. Because I can tell you, it really, really sucks when everything's going well and all of a sudden you've ruined your shirt. But that is not to say that you should give up. Once again, you're gonna make so many mistakes. It's totally normal. And the worst thing that you could do is freak out and get into like that giving up mindset, because then you're just gonna make more mistakes. So I just learned throughout the screen printing process to just stay as chill as you possibly can, even if you make mistakes, and then just do better next time. I think this is pretty dry now, so let's continue. Just line up where the next color should go. In this case, my red. You get your ink and you put not too little and not too much. It's probably less than you think though. And when you're finished printing, you want to try and save some of the ink and put it back into wherever you're keeping it. Conserve your resources. Alright, so I'm not going to wait for the small squeegee to dry because it's going to take too long. So I'm just going to use this and just try and print as evenly as possible. Alright, so there we have it. It's not completely perfect, but it kind of fits to the aesthetic of my printed shirt. So that's kind of like the beauty of screen printing, right? It's like not always even. There you go. And once again, I'm gonna go quickly cover my inks and wash all of my materials so that the ink doesn't dry on them and ruin them. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!